Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. A complete shutdown is being observed over the extrajudicial killings of two youths by Indian forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. All shops and businesses are closed, while public transport is also suspended in Shopia and Pulwama districts. Meanwhile, the occupying forces have launched the so-called cordon and search operations in Srinagar, Sopore and Budgam. Gunmen have killed 3 Afghan security personnel in an attack on the Shutdown Dam in western Herat province. A spokesman for the National Water Affairs Regulation Authority said 4 others were wounded in the attack. Meanwhile, 2 people were killed in an attack on a student bus of Bahrain University in the city of Khumri. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Washington will continue to work with allies towards the denuclearization of North Korea. It comes after North Korea threatened to scrap the inter-Korean cooperation as it condemned the U.S.-South Korea military drills. The sister of North Korean leader Kim Yo-jong cautioned Washington against causing a stink if it wants peace. Latvia and Slovenia have joined the rapidly expanding list of countries that have suspended the use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. The World Health Organization says there is no evidence of a link between the vaccine and blood clots. Pakistan has registered over 2,500 infections and 58 fatalities overnight, with the death toll approaching 13,600. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.6 million lives and infected more than 120 million people so far. And in football, Lionel Messi's brace has held Barcelona thrash Huesca 4-1 in their Spanish La Liga face-off. The Argentine star also equaled Xavi Alonso's record for most Barcelona appearances with his 767th game. The win moves Barca back in second place, 4 points behind leaders Atletico Madrid. Now, these were top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. A complete shutdown is being observed over the extrajudicial killings by Indian forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Indian troops earlier killed 2 youths after blowing up their houses during a 3-day-long cordon and search operation. All shops and businesses are closed, while public transport is also suspended in the district. Meanwhile, the occupying forces conducted more of its violent so-called cordon and search operations in Srinagar, Sopore and Budgam. Now, gunmen have killed 3 Afghan security personnel in an attack on the Shutdown Dam in western Herat province. A spokesperson for the National Water Affairs Regulation Authority said 4 others were wounded. Herat governor's spokesperson has blamed the Taliban for the attack. He said 5 fighters of the group were killed in retaliation. Meanwhile, 2 people were killed in an attack on a student bus of the Bahrain University in the city of Khumri. Police have blamed the Taliban, but they have denied the accusation. Meanwhile, a U.S. watchdog on Afghanistan has warned that further aid cuts can imperil the war-torn country. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction says the slashes by the U.S. and other donors can cause the government to collapse. In an interview, John Sopko said any such move would return Afghanistan to chaos. He said 80% of Afghanistan's budget is funded by the United States and other international donors. Sopko said even the Taliban recognize they really need foreign support. He added the World Bank found if the peace pact is reached, Afghanistan will need $5.2 billion in aid through 2024. Moving on now, at least 5 rockets have hit an Iraqi military base housing U.S. troops in north of Baghdad. The Iraqi military says 2 more rockets fell outside the Balad air base and caused damage to a civilian house. The military said the attack caused no casualties on ground. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Earlier this month, the U.S. said it will defend its interests at all costs after a rocket attack on Iraq's Ain al-Sadr air base. At least 10 rockets were fired at the base in Anbar province that left a U.S. contractor dead due to cardiac arrest. U.S. forces retaliated by carrying out airstrikes against facilities at a border control point in Syria used by the pro-Iran militias. Now, the Arab coalition says it has intercepted another Houthi drone targeting Saudi Arabia's Khamis Mushaid city. Earlier, 2 Houthi ballistic missiles hit the uninhabited border areas of the same area. A coalition spokesperson says they have destroyed a bunker for ballistic missiles and launch pads in the northern Yemeni province of Sada. He said they are taking operational measures to protect civilians from extremist attacks. Meanwhile, a Houthi spokesperson said they also fired drones at the King Khalid airbase in Khamis Mushaid in southern Saudi Arabia. Now, Houthi attacks into Saudi Arabia have escalated in recent weeks. In Myanmar, protesters and families of the 20 demonstrators killed by police overnight will hold their funerals today. The supporters of detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi have shown no signs of backing down in the face of growing violence. In a statement, UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric said Secretary General Antonio Guterres is appalled by the escalating violence. Guterres called on the international community to help end the repression by Myanmar's military. U.S. State Department spokesperson Jelena Porter has also termed the violence by the coup leaders immoral and indefensible. According to a local monitoring group, more than 180 people have been killed since the February 1st coup. Now, the U.S. says it will continue to work with allies towards the denuclearization of North Korea. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this in a meeting with his Japanese counterpart Toshimitsu Motegi in Tokyo. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki also said Washington has reached out to North Korea but has not received a response. Talking to reporters, Psaki said Pyongyang has rebuffed U.S. calls for dialogue. Meanwhile, North Korea threatened to scrap inter-Korean cooperation as it condemned the U.S.-South Korea military drills. The sister of North Korean leader Kim Yo-jong warned Washington against causing a stink if it wants peace. She said they warn the new U.S. administration, which is trying hard to give off foul smell in their land. Now, China says cooperation between the United States and Japan must not harm third-party interests. This comes after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Japan.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said U.S. diplomats called China a threat while meeting with Japanese counterparts. At a press conference, Zhao said China believes the U.S.-Japan cooperation should benefit regional peace and stability. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned China against using coercion and aggression during his first visit to Japan. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is accompanying Blinken on the trip. Blinken and Austin held a 2+2 meeting with Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi and Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi in Tokyo. A joint statement said the ministers discussed Washington's unwavering commitment to defend Japan in its territorial dispute with China. In a joint press conference, Motegi said China-related issues took up the majority of his bilateral talks with Blinken. He said the meeting expressed strong opposition to Beijing's attempt to change the status quo in the East and South China Seas. Other issues, including COVID-19 vaccines, semiconductor supply chain security, the military coup in Myanmar, and North Korea's nuclear threat, was also discussed during the meeting.
Moving on now, China has urged the West to stop interfering in the internal affairs of other countries under the pretext of human rights. Head of the Chinese mission to the United Nations office at Geneva, Cheng Shu, was speaking at the 46th session of the UN Human Rights Council. Chen accused the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada and some European Union members of abusing the UNHCR platform. He said they used the platform to spread false information and groundless accusations against China. The envoy reaffirmed Beijing's firm opposition to the propaganda, saying it always puts people first. He said China has made visible achievements in advancing the cause of human rights. The envoy urged the highlighted countries to stop infringing on the human rights of their people and other countries. Now, bank employees across India are holding a strike for a second day to condemn the privatization of two public sector banks. The unions warn the strike may take a form similar to the farmers' protesters that have been going on since November last year. Demonstrators staged protests in New Delhi, northern Lucknow and Panchkula cities. The strike was called after talks between bank unions and the BJP government failed. The unions say nearly 1 million staffers across the country have participated in the strike. They say the BJP government's policy is against the interests of the state.
Today, the government is adamant on closing the public sector banks. They are adamant in giving it into private hands, and by giving it to the private sector, the money of our country will go to other countries in the form of dividend. The revenue of our country will go to other countries, which is not tolerable to us.
While Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had announced the privatization of two public sector banks in the federal budget of 2021. Now moving on, Greece and Turkey are meeting in Athens in an attempt to settle their standoff over the Eastern Mediterranean's maritime borders and energy rights. It is the 66th such meeting since the year 2000. The two NATO allies have been at odds over a number of decades-old maritime issues. These issues include the extent of their continental shelves, overflights in the Aegean Sea and ethnically split Cyprus. Latvia and Slovenia have joined the rapidly expanding list of countries that have suspended the use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. The World Health Organization says there is no evidence of a link between the vaccine and blood clots. Meanwhile, globally, the virus has claimed over 2.6 million lives and infected more than 120 million people so far. More on the pandemic in this report.
The focus of government seems to be shifting to only one vaccine, AstraZeneca, at the moment, as they appear divided over its usage against COVID-19. The WHO has urged the countries to continue using AstraZeneca, while it has scheduled a meeting of experts to discuss the vaccine's safety today. Canadian health experts say all COVID-19 vaccines being administered in the country are safe, including those made by AstraZeneca. The Oxford vaccine is one of the few that the Brazilian health regulatory agency, Anvisa, has so far approved. But Venezuela says it will not authorize AstraZeneca vaccine, citing unspecified effects on patients. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues to be enthusiastic about the inoculation drive.
Over the next 10 days, we will reach two giant goals. The first is 100 million shots in people's arms will have been completed within the next 10 days, and 100 million checks in people's pockets in the next 100 days.
Major European nations, including Italy, Germany and France, have also suspended the use of AstraZeneca's vaccine. European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control data shows the bloc has nearly 8 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine sitting unused. The European Medicines Agency has echoed the WHO's calls for calm and says it is better to get the Oxford vaccine than not. Meanwhile, Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has tested positive for COVID-19. In France, hospitals and intensive care units face mounting stress due to the pandemic.
Every day we have 1 or 2 beds available in intensive care, which isn't a lot. Today we have 34 patients hospitalized in intensive care because of COVID, among the total of 73 beds available. So that means that we have a lot of patients that are here for other diseases. So if necessary, we can postpone surgeries or medical treatments other than COVID.
Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-ocha has become the country's first person to be inoculated with the AstraZeneca vaccine after the rollout was temporarily put on hold over safety concerns. Australia says it has no plans to halt the use of the Oxford vaccine. Meanwhile, for the 6th straight day, India has reported more than 20,000 cases overnight.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, another 58 people have died from COVID-19 and over 2,500 tested positive for the virus overnight. The Health Ministry says the countrywide death toll is approaching 13,600. Pakistan's caseload has crossed 607,000, of which more than 571,000 people have recovered. The ministry says the number of active cases in the country has topped 23,000 and nearly 2,400 people are admitted to hospitals across the country. Meanwhile, the government has started walk-in COVID-19 vaccinations for citizens aged 70 and above. Now, Bahrain has lauded Pakistan's Navy's role in maintaining peace and order in the Indian Ocean region. Bahrain's Naval Forces Commander Commodore Mohammed Yusuf Al-Assam shared these views while meeting Pakistan's naval chief. Pakistan's naval chief Mohammed Amjad Khan Niazi is on a visit to Bahrain to discuss regional security and ways to boost cooperation. Bahrain's naval head received Admiral Niazi on his arrival and presented the Guard of Honor. Niazi held separate meetings with leaders of Bahrain Defence Forces. Pakistan Navy's media wing says the two sides discussed matters related to maritime security and defence collaborations. Admiral Niazi underscored the Navy's initiative of regional maritime security patrols to ensure peace and order in the region. Now, at the United Nations, Pakistan has proposed a global compact for women's empowerment plan to ensure their participation in decision-making. Envoy Munir Akram virtually addressed the 65th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. The envoy proposed concrete measures to eliminate violence against women and girls. He said despite progress, women's voices continue to be silenced and their participation in public life obstructed. He called on the international community to ensure that women, who constitute half of the world's population, are never again left behind. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the European Union is launching a legal action against the United Kingdom of alleged violations of the Brexit deal's protocol on Ireland and the Northern Ireland. In a letter to London, Brussels has given formal notice of its plans to kickstart an infringement procedure of fines being imposed by the EU's top court. The 27-nation bloc is objecting to the UK's unilaterally extending a grace period beyond April 1st applying to trade concerning Ireland. Responding, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the extension was simply a technical decision aimed at being fair. Meanwhile, the US has urged Britain and the European Union to preserve the Good Friday Accord for peace in Northern Ireland. Talking to reporters, Saki said President Joe Biden has been unequivocal in his support for the Belfast Agreement. Moving on now, thousands took to the streets of Bolivia in protest against the arrest of former President Jeanine Áñez. She has begun a 4-month jail term over her alleged role in a coup that led to the removal of Evo Morales from power in 2019. The protesters chanted slogans in favor of Áñez and called her a brave woman. Earlier, police took Áñez into custody from her home in Trinidad and transferred her to a women's prison in the capital, La Paz. Justice Minister Ivana Lima said he would seek a 30-year jail sentence if Áñez is convicted of fomenting a coup. Her Energy and Justice ministers also were ordered into custody. The three face charges of terrorism, sedition and conspiracy over the alleged coup. Even after 10 years since the crisis in Syria erupted, war refugees are forced to live in extremely tough and miserable conditions. The story of such a family is in this report.
Habis al-Mahmoud and his family have been in a continuous struggle against hunger, diseases, cold and whatnot for the past several years. Mahmoud is a war refugee who lives in a scruffy tent with his wife and 5 children in a camp for the displaced persons in central Syria. But the living conditions over here are still better than the overcrowded Rukban camp where they previously lived.
In the Rukban camp, we did not have water to drink and could only drink the rainwater in the pit. I could see the worms squirming in the water.
Mahmoud and his family have been left exhausted by years of drifting around and greatly miss the happier, worry-free days before the Syrian crisis erupted.
Before the war, we used to have everything. Services such as heating and public medical care were all free.
According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Syria remains the world's largest refugee crisis. Since 2011, over 6.6 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes, and another 6.7 million people remain displaced in the country.
Now, Icelanders are yearning for some undisturbed shut-eye after a couple of jittery weeks, literally. Tremors from tens of thousands of earthquakes have rattled their sleep in an unprecedented seismic event which might well end in a spectacular lava show.
Located between the Eurasian and the North American tectonic plates, Iceland frequently experiences earthquakes. The source of the past week's earthquakes is a large body of molten rock known as magma, moving roughly 1 kilometer beneath the peninsula as it tries to push its way to the surface.
So the situation in Grindavik is quite uncomfortable right now. Everyone is sleep deprived because the earth is constantly moving all day, all night. Some earthquakes are bigger than others, some are 3.1, some are 4.2. Today we had a big one, 5.4.
Authorities in Iceland warned of an imminent volcanic eruption on the peninsula in early March, but said they did not expect it to disturb international air traffic or damage critical infrastructure nearby.
So there are some concerns about infrastructure on the Reykjanes Peninsula and what would happen if we have an eruption. Of course, the international airport is very close, but since the eruption is likely going to be very quiet and not very explosive and no huge amounts of ash, so that should not be an effect on the airport, hopefully.
More than 40,000 earthquakes have occurred since the 24th of February, exceeding the total number of earthquakes registered on the peninsula last year.
Nominations for this year's Oscars have been announced in Los Angeles ahead of the virtual ceremony on 25th of April. Netflix Hollywood drama Mank is leading the nominations with 10 nods, including Best Picture.
After many delays of this pandemic year, the Oscar nominations are finally upon us. Sacha Baron Cohen, Carey Mulligan, Olivia Colman, Daniel Kaluuya, and Sir Anthony Hopkins are among the British stars nominated. They are joined by the likes of Frances McDormand, Glenn Close, Viola Davis, and the late Chadwick Boseman for Best Actor. Other Best Picture nods went to dementia drama The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, and Korean language drama Minari. British Pakistani Riz Ahmed has become the first Muslim nominated for Best Actor in a leading role for Sound of Metal. South Korean actress Yoo Jung-yeon has become the first Korean actress to get an Oscar nod, while Chinese-born director Chloe Zhao nabbed one of the 5 Best Director nods for Nomadland. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences said a record 76 nominations went to women. The event will take place at Los Angeles Union Station and the Dolby Theater next month. The form of the ceremony has not yet been announced.
In business stories now, European stocks are trading higher following the global trend. Investors are awaiting key central bank meetings this week, starting with the US Federal Reserve. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB are leading the gains, rising over 0.5%. The CAC 40 in Paris has added marginally as well. The Stock 600 and Frankfurt's DAX have added nearly 0.5%. Earlier, all Asian markets advanced following overnight gains at Wall Street. Now in football, Barcelona beat Huesca 4-1 in their Spanish La Liga face-off. The win moves Barca back in second place, 4 points behind leaders Atletico Madrid. Leo Messi's brace, along with goals from Antoine Griezmann and Oscar Mingueza, led Barca to a comfortable win. The Argentine star also equals Xavi Hernandez's all-record for most Barcelona appearances with his 767th game. Messi will break former Spain midfielder Xavi's record on Sunday if he plays against Real Sociedad. let's have a look how the weather is doing across the world. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.